Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most structurally complex and frankly forensically significant investigations in modern American criminology, the Gilgo Beach killings. For decades, this case completely frustrated law enforcement, it tormented the victims' families, and it absolutely captivated the public. But through this fascinating combination of digital forensics and groundbreaking genetic science, they finally reached a resolution. My goal today is to guide you through the structured evidence of this incredibly complex case and break down exactly how investigators unraveled a mystery that haunted Long Island for over 30 years.
It's a staggering question, isn't it? I mean, how does a literal piece of garbage in a bustling city trash can bring down an architect living a secret life as a serial predator? Well, to answer that, we really have to look at an investigative timeline that spans decades of frustration, institutional roadblocks, and unimaginable grief. It's a story of how microscopic clues ultimately brought down a macro-level monster.
Part 1. The First Discoveries.
Okay, let's dive right into this timeline. The horrific pattern actually began long before the case made national headlines. Way back in November 1993, hunters discovered the body of Sandra Castile in the woods of the Hamptons. But it wasn't until late 2010 that the true scale of the horror became apparent, when the remains of the so-called Gilgo 4 were found along Ocean Parkway. By the spring of 2011, 6 additional sets of remains were uncovered in the surrounding scrub and marshlands. And yet, despite this massive, highly publicized discovery, the case went cold. It was heavily plagued by severe institutional dysfunction and corruption within the local police department that actively blocked FBI involvement. Honestly, it wasn't until a multi-agency task force was formed in early 2022 that the tides finally turned.
You know, the catalyst that really blew this entire case wide open was a chilling plea for help. On May 1, 2010, a 23-year-old sex worker named Shanann Gilbert made a frantic, almost 5-minute 911 call, fleeing into the Long Island marshlands. While her official cause of death was later heavily debated, the intensive boots-on-the-ground search for Shanann is what inadvertently exposed this horrific dumping ground along the New York coastline. Without her desperate call for help, it's highly likely these victims would have remained hidden forever.
During that search, K-9 units stumbled upon Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is the identical taphonomic features, meaning the specific physical conditions and environment of the remains. All 4 were petite women in their 20s, operating as escorts. All of them were bound, wrapped in heavy burlap sacks, and killed by strangulation. This distinct, highly organized modus operandi made police immediately realize they weren't dealing with random acts of violence. They were dealing with a highly calculating serial killer.
Part 2. A cold case thaws.
Now here's where it gets really fascinating. Look at how the 2022 task force started cross-referencing isolated witness accounts with digital telemetry. Years earlier, a roommate of victim Amber Costello had described a prospective client as an ogre-like man, about 6'5", driving a dark green first-generation Chevy Avalanche. So when the task force finally ran a vehicle registration database search matching that exact criteria, it pointed directly to a Manhattan architect named Rex Heuermann. Then they mapped the cell towers. The burner phones used to contact the victims pinged in a tight, very specific geographic zone: Massapequa Park, where Heuermann lived, and Midtown Manhattan, exactly where his firm was located. And wow, when investigators actually dug into his digital footprint, the crumbs painted a profoundly disturbing picture. Beyond using those burner phones to arrange meetings, his subpoenaed internet history revealed hundreds of searches showing an intense, almost obsessive interest in the Gilgo Beach investigation itself. Furthermore, he was actively searching for sadistic materials, violent torture pornography, and even images of the victims' relatives. This digital evidence was pointing directly and aggressively right at Heuermann.
Part 3. The Secret Investigation.
As District Attorney Ray Tierney put it, the strategy was crystal clear. They wanted the murderer to think it was business as usual. The task force had to meticulously keep their investigation totally secret over a grueling 16-month surveillance period. They knew Heuermann was highly organized and clearly obsessed with the case. If he even suspected they were onto him, he could easily destroy vital evidence, or worse, just flee the country. So they watched his commute, his lunch breaks, his every single move, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike.
Why were they so incredibly cautious? Well, because of what they later found on his encrypted computer hardware. Investigators uncovered a deleted Microsoft Word document that was essentially a terrifying, step-by-step operational blueprint for murder. It outlined a corporate, almost risk management approach to homicide. He listed problems to avoid, like leaving DNA or tire marks. He maintained a supplies list for restraint and cleanup.
He meticulously researched dump sites and analyzed criteria for his targets. This wasn't crimes of passion, folks. This was a highly calculated, sadistic operation.
Part 4. The Pizza Crust DNA. To really grasp this breakthrough, we need to talk a little bit about the science involved. The traditional DNA testing you usually hear about on TV just wasn't enough for remains that have been exposed to the harsh elements of a barrier island for years. Enter SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism testing. This is a highly advanced genetic technique that looks at single nucleotide changes across thousands of sites on the genome. It is absolutely incredibly effective for degraded, low-copy, or historic DNA samples.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between these methods, which is basically night and day. Traditional STR testing relies on analyzing repeating units, which break down incredibly fast in the sun, salt, and soil. It's great for fresh crime scenes, but it was pretty much useless here. SNP testing, however, isolates those single, robust changes. This modern tool was a literal game changer because the only evidence they had to work with was just decades-old, highly degraded hair shafts found clinging to the burlap sacks and tape used to bind the victims.
Which brings us to the ultimate breakthrough. The surveillance team tailing Huerman in Manhattan literally watched him eat lunch and toss a box with partially eaten pizza crusts into a sidewalk trash can. Investigators rushed in, bagged the crusts, and sent them straight to the lab. Using that advanced S&P testing we just talked about, the lab matched a swab from the discarded pizza crust directly to a male hair found on the burlap wrapping of victim Megan Waterman. Just like that, a completely mundane piece of trash definitively linked the suspect to the crime scenes.
But the scope of the DNA evidence didn't actually stop with just him. While Huerman's hair was found on Megan Waterman, female hairs were also found at the crime scenes. A hair on Maureen Brainerd Barnes's belt buckle matched Huerman's wife, Asa Ellerup. Hairs on Valerie Mack's remains matched his wife and his daughter. Now, to be incredibly clear here, authorities stated his family had absolutely no knowledge of or involvement in the crimes. But what this proved, crucially, was that his family was out of state during the exact time frames of the murders. This gave Huerman the unfettered time alone in his house to commit these atrocities, accidentally transferring his family's stray hairs onto the tape and burlap.
To put that into perspective, just how precise is this science? The advanced mitochondrial sequencing determined that the female hair found on the belt buckle binding Maureen Brainerd Barnes was 7.9 trillion times more likely to belong to Huerman's wife than to anyone else on the planet. That's trillion with a T. Against that kind of mathematical certainty, the suspect's carefully constructed double life simply collapsed.
Part 5. Relief and Justice. So in April 2026, the long-awaited judicial resolution finally arrived. Rex Huerman stood in court and pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder, while also actively admitting to an 8th killing, that of Karen Vergata. Observers actually noted his completely unemotional, stone-cold demeanor as he faced a packed gallery of his victims' families. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, permanently removing him from society, and he agreed to cooperate fully with the FBI to help them catch other serial offenders.
But honestly, the true weight of that day belonged entirely to the families. As Melissa Cann, the sister of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, so powerfully expressed, "This has been a long journey of hope. Hope that one day we would stand here and say her name with justice beside it." Hearing the killer publicly admit his crimes brought immense, overwhelming emotional relief and a profound sense of closure to the families who had suffered in agonizing uncertainty for well over a decade.
The resolution of the Gilgo Beach killings is basically a masterclass in the intersection of digital sleuthing and microscopic biology. It proves that no matter how organized the perpetrator is, or frankly how much time has passed, modern science really can shine a light into the darkest of shadows. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. As genetic genealogy and advanced forensic science continue to expose the demons that walk among us, what other decades-old cold cases are finally ready to thaw? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.